Hi, this is Joe Merschman, and I'm here today with a longtime friend, Harry Stine. He's been a friend of my father's for over 50 years. I think you met back in the old Iowa crop improvement days, served as board members, and today we're here to talk to him about corn. And most of you know Harry's reputation in the industry. Harry's known as the king of soybeans because he's accomplished so much, and so much of the genetics out there in the market today contain lines or genetics from his program. Well, he's doing the same thing in corn. In fact, we got associated with Harry on corn by holding a testing location back in the day on my grandfather's farm. So we've been watching his fledgling corn program mature, and it's basically cutting new paths right now as far as some of the things that you're doing. So Harry, tell us about what you started and where you're at now with your corn program.
Okay, first I would like to back up a little bit and say that in addition to knowing your father for over 50 years, he's my very best friend. So we are very close to the entire Merschman family, and we appreciate this relationship. But on corn, whether it's corn or soybeans, we never follow the path that's well beaten. We kind of go off on our own. And when we first did this in soybeans, it worried me a little bit because I thought, do we know what we're doing? Well, today with our position in the dominant in the market, I think we do. And so likewise in corn, we're following a different path also. And I should point out though, however, everything we know about corn, we learned from the people that went before us. So in our case, Don Duvik, the late Don Duvik, who was a research director at Pioneer, published a lot of data to help us understand where to go. And Forrest Troyer, another corn breeder who's now deceased, also helped us understand where corn is going. So with those gentlemen helping us, we realized that the new corn had to be higher population, and probably because of higher population had to be lower statured. And then in addition to that, corn traditionally has been mostly family oriented. And Forrest Troyer said, hybrid corn trials are just an indirect way to evaluate inbreds, and that you should just go directly to inbreds. So this year we had 54,000 inbreds in yield trials, and we're following that path that he suggested. And besides having that many inbreds, they aren't the normal families. They're mixed families. So we're doing about everything wrong that you could, and we're extremely pleased. We've had the highest yielding hybrids coming out of this year's trials that I've ever seen.
So you talk about, and I've heard you talk about this, looking for 1 in a billion. That's what plant breeding is. That's really the key to success, is the size of the program and being able to screen as many products. And tell us about that.
Well, plant breeding, assuming you're doing everything else right, is the numbers game. And I like to give an example that you're going to go here in West Point, and you're going to take 2 or 3 dozen kids and form a basketball team. And I'm going to go to Chicago, and I'm going to check 100,000 kids for my basketball team. Who's going to win? You see, it doesn't have anything to do with the skill of the people involved. It has to do with the numbers game. So when we look at huge numbers of anything, whether it be corn or soybeans, but in this case it's corn, that's part of the game, assuming you have an appropriate way to evaluate, in this case, the corn lines. So huge numbers are the name of the game, and diverse genetics combined with effective evaluation, we think, is the key to our higher yielding hybrids.
So one of the tools you use is a new generation of combine from Almoco. Tell us about that combine, how that helps you do breeding more effectively in evaluations.
Well, there's a couple things involved here. The new Almoco combines do 2 plots at a time, and then we've got them set up. They actually do 2 independently, 2 13-inch rows, each side of the head does. And that lets us, though, when we run 24 hours a day, which is how we do our plots in corn or anything, huge numbers can be cranked through. And we have, 3 or 5 of these machines now. But in addition to that, we've put special heads on these combines so that in the case of these 3 narrow rows I talked about, they're bordered by a common border, every single plot. This is what we do in our inbreds. Because inbreds vary in height, they vary in maturity, they vary in vigor, and if you run them side by side, they mess up the data of each one. So in our case, we have a common known border going by all of them at a known population and a known height, and so we get rid of all that variability.
In terms of size, how many new hybrids are you looking at every year?
Well, this year I think we're only looking at maybe 40,000 new hybrids coming through the system. Well, I should correct that. That's 40,000 in one category, and we have a couple different categories because, again, we're always modifying our evaluation system. It doesn't stay constant over years as we learn. Next year we may be doing something different than this year, and so forth.
So where do you see corn yields going in the future?
Well, I love to quote some data. So in the decade of the 1930s, and incidentally, there was 100 million acres of corn planted every year in the United States during that decade, which is more than we're planting today. And partially that's because we didn't have soybeans during the 1930s of any significance. But the average yield for the entire United States for the entire decade was 24 bushels per acre. And so my father started farming on the farm we're on right today in 1934. And if you would have told him your kid is going to be able to get 10 times the yield that the national average is today, he would have thought that was crazy and absurd. So when we tell people we're going to double the yield today, they think, oh, you can't do that. Well, that's nothing compared to 10 times. And so we see constantly in both corn and soybeans yields continuing to go up. And some people say, well, you're going to get at the end of that rope and you aren't going to be able to continue to do that. We do not see anything lowering that at all. We constantly are making higher yielding hybrids and higher yielding soybean lines.
So Harry, a farmer's wanting to try Stine Corn for the first time. What's your advice? What's the way to get that yield to show what he wants it to be? What's your recommendations on Stine Corn?
Well, this is a very good question, Joe, because part of our problem is our hybrids take a program. So you just can't go and do one single thing. So they need higher population, they need a little higher sulfur, they need a little higher potassium, and they need just a little higher nitrogen. And people say, well, why do you have to do that? Well, I'm sorry, if you're going to get higher yield, there's nothing magic about this corn. You're going to have higher inputs. And they say, well, that costs too much. Well, those are minor costs compared to your fixed costs of your land and your equipment and labor. So those costs are it's very cost effective to increase those things, but you have to do it all together. If you just say, well, I'm going to do one of those and not the other, I'm sorry, it doesn't work. So it's a program that you have to use in order to use these new hybrids for the new higher yields. We have a Minnesota farmer who continually gets about 300 bushel every year with our hybrids, and he points out to anyone that it's a system that you have to use in order to get those kind of yields. And he uses even high sulfur, I think, than anyone else. But following the system will get you high yields. If you fail to do that, I'm sorry, you'll be disappointed.
What about in stress situations, Harry? How do your hybrids perform in stress? You know, they're the upright leaves, they're shorter, you have higher population. How does that work for a farmer that's got a little lower yield environment?
Well, ironically, a lot of people today have the variable planting rates, and we think they're doing exactly opposite of what they should be doing. In the poorer soils, assuming moisture is not the limiting factor, you actually need more plants than you do on the better high-yielding areas of your field. Because those plants are smaller, you don't have enough leaf surface area. Now it's true the yield is not going to be as high and the ears are going to be smaller, but you're going to get more yield by having a higher pop in the poorer soils relative to the good soils. And we see this data all the time, And in all fairness, it's counterintuitive. It doesn't seem logical on corn, but a lot of people recognize that's true on soybeans, and the same factor is true on corn. In order to get the right leaf surface area, you need a higher pop on the poorer soils.
Harry, did you select for shorter corn, upright leaves, or how'd that all turn out?
I like to tell people that when we have a corn plant, I don't care if the leaves are orange and on upside down. All we care about is yield and standability. So those are the only factors that play into our selection system. After we select for yield and standability, then we look to see what it is we selected. So we don't care how tall the plants are, but as you can see, when we go for higher yields, the tendency is to get slightly shorter plants. And incidentally, when I say slightly shorter, I don't mean dwarf plants. Dwarf plants have dwarf roots. So some companies think they can get some really very short corn, and they can. But under dry conditions, when you need all the moisture you can reach, those dwarf roots limit you significantly.
So Harry, you had a derecho on your farm last summer. What did you learn from that, and what did Stine Corn, how did it perform in that situation?
Well, we had some farmers in our area that planted part our corn and part of the regular taller corn. And it was very funny because they came to us just before that storm and they said, "We're not sure about your corn. It's kind of short and doesn't look all that good." After the storm, they came and said, "Gosh, we wish we'd had our whole farm planted to your corn," because the tendency was for this corn to stand much better. And incidentally, sulfur, I constantly have to preach sulfur. Sulfur also helps corn standability. So particularly on the farms that had used a little higher sulfur and used our hybrids, their standability of the corn was greatly improved.
Well, thanks, Harry, for spending a few moments with us to talk to us about your corn hybrid program. We're really pleased to be able to work with you, and as we introduce it to our customers, I think they will be happy too. So thank you.
Well, we're very pleased to be here, and particularly as being here today, we were also able to celebrate your father's 93rd birthday.
Yep. And I know he appreciated seeing you.